and then we can go ahead and get started. This will kind of be a continuation. For those who came for our last two in this series, we've just been talking about the fundraising process. Last month, we were talking about the different kinds of capital and how you may be looking for different kinds of capital at different points in time. Today, in some ways, is a continuation of that, right? Like when you are knowing what kinds of different capital you're looking for, or you're aware that you have different kinds of investors, how do you build that story for them, right? How do you figure out what the right message is for those different kinds of investors? So that's what we'll be talking about today. I feel like this seems like a good number of folks. We could go ahead and get started. So like I was saying, right? Today's message is around how do you curate their story, right? And we want to be, oh, I'm sorry, can everyone still see that? I just realized I resized it and it may have moved. Okay, cool. Uh, and there's always different kinds and different aspects to your story, right? And so you're not being untruthful by telling different versions of your story, but you're curating the message that's appropriate for the audience that you have. So just a little brief background about Joyous. Joyous is the studio that Vivian and I founded. We are designers, we're artists, we're writers, we're builders, and we really love to build products. So we really love to help people understand more deeply where those difficult problems come from and how do you solve them. We've been really blessed to work across different industries, and we're at this point in our lives now where we're looking and saying, hey, where are the places that we want to work? Where are the places we want to focus? And being queer individuals ourselves, the notion of being able to help support other queer entrepreneurs and build, we're an awesome group of people. So helping everyone kind of get forward is something we really like to do with our time. But like I said, today, we're really talking about this notion of your story, of your message, your company message. And one of the things that I found was really successful last week was taking people through in detail some of the work that we've done in the past. And so that's one of the things I'm going to do today. As I mentioned, or you may know if you look me up or something, I recently joined the board of Tomboy X, which is a queer underwear brand. Fran and Naomi, I believe, were recognized, I think, last 2 years ago at the Start Out Awards. They built this underwear brand for women, Tomboy X, for queer women, but primarily, but really for all kinds of people about 15 years ago. And over the many years, there's been lots of ups and downs. And recently, this year, we had to raise a down round. And so there was a really difficult message that we had to take out to different kinds of investors. And so one of the things I'm going to do today is use that as a snapshot to kind of walk you through how we change the message in order to connect with the different kinds of investors that we are looking to connect with. But first, I'd love to just, if you guys, you're already writing into the chat, just take 2 minutes. Tell me some brands that you guys feel are special, right? Maybe their story feels special, the brand feels special to you, but just give me some brands. What are some brands that you feel like are special? I'm gonna avail of my standing desk in the meantime. Where? Very much. Yeah. Thank you, Megan. Maybe works in finance. Well, I don't know if I know Carmen Lou. I have to look at that one. Cool. Okay. I mean, feel free to, keep writing in there if you didn't get a chance yet. But I wanted to give you guys send you down that kind of thinking so we can come back to that a little bit later in the conversation. I've now managed to lose my window. Where'd it go? My goodness. 1 second. There we are. Well, I grew up in Seattle, and in Seattle, a brand that we grew up with is very much feels special, and has a big part of their identity is Nordstrom. And Nordstrom, part of what made them feel so special is that they have this really storied customer service experience, right? The story has always been that you could take anything back to Nordstrom. And I had a friend actually who worked in the shoe department when we were like 15 or 16. It was his first job, and he learned that, right? Like that your starting premise needs to be that the customer, we're going to support the customer what they're looking for, that we are going to take this thing back, even if you're almost certain that you've never sold it, even if it's not a product that Nordstrom would typically be there. And Nordstrom is well aware of this. And earlier this year, or maybe it was last year, they put out this press release, which I have up in front of you guys right now, which is the story of someone returning a tire. And this story is something that you hear about growing up in Seattle, right? It's so much a story of this company, of this brand, that actually gets talked about outside of the company. And because it's a crazy story, right? This dude returned a tire. Um, but when we think about that kind of story, right, it's showing you the company's values, right? It's showing you the thing that makes the company special without having to just tell it to you. And I think that's a key thing I'd love to have you just kind of nestle into the back of your head as we walk through there. Of course, it leads to an obvious question, right? Which is when we're standing up here, when we are founders, when we're marketers, and we're trying to tell the story of our company, well, it's very obvious in retrospect, right? It's very obvious for Nordstrom to be like, yes, customer service has been the thing that has changed our company. It has like defined us. We need to have this company story be around customer service. Very easy, way in hindsight, right? Very easy 50 years down into the journey. But when you're early on, like the way a lot of us are, how do you know what's going to feel special? And something that I'll give you a little sneak preview that I think Divya and I will love to chat about with you guys a little bit later is something that we've struggled with, right? As we've been building Joyous now for a couple of years, how do we figure out what feels special? Which of those attributes that are unique to our brand, are unique to our approach, are the right ones to be highlighting, especially when you're going out and having these investor conversations? So let me tell you about how we approached it, right? So for Tomboy, like I mentioned, we were in a little bit of a situation, right? The company was running out of money. We had to raise money in a down round. And unfortunately, we had had a great round in 2019. And let me just pause there for maybe those who are not as familiar with these terms. So a down round means that the company is going to be valued at less than the company was previously valued. So what happened for Tomboy X was in 2019, we were valued, I think, if I remember correctly, almost at 30. I think 30 was pre even. It may have been $40 million post money. And those differences are just referring to, are you looking at are you talking about the valuation before the money came in or the after the money came in? So pre-money valuations before the money that came in that round, and post-money valuations after that money came in that round. So had this great valuation in 2019. And then we were out raising money this year at $5 million valuation pre, right? It was a $10 million post because we raised $5 million, but it was a $5 million pre-money valuation. So we were taking a company that was previously worth 40 million, and we were now out trying to go and shop it. And the first people we were trying to shop it to were the people who cared the most about our business, who were the investors that had been with Tomboy X from the beginning. These were not easy conversations because some of these people had had the opportunity to sell in 2019 and they had chosen not to because they believed in Fran. They believed in the founder, they believed in the company, and they were like, no, I'm going to stay with you guys. And now here we were saying, well, guess what? Your money is now worth 10% of what it was. So those were not easy conversations, but it doesn't help, even when you feel shame, even when you're feeling guilt about maybe being in that situation. Your responsibility is to try and tell the best story you can for the sake of your company, right? For the sake of the people who are part of that. And that was what we had to do, right? We had to frame this news in a way that was going to make us look as good as we could, even when it was bad news. So something that we call out here in that kind of gray text off to the side is that we didn't want to blame the people who had made those decisions over the past 5 years, because a lot of times these are people that the investors had connections with, even if they weren't maybe as big roles in the company anymore, or they've taken a step back, whatever. But a lot of times what's very typical is, oh, like in the past, all these mistakes were made, but now we're this team that's going to do great in the future. That can really burn people when they had a connection to you in the past. So that's one of the first places where you want to say, okay, what is this? What is the nature of the relationship I have with these people? And how am I honoring that in the way that I'm taking the story to them? And then a big part also is figuring out what are the things that people care about, right? And in this case, we know that these investors had been with us for a while. We know that they know us as people, right? Even before Tomboy X was this brand, well, in some ways very iconic queer brand, it was Fran and Naomi. And it was Fran and Naomi who went around and they were at pride parades all over the country. Like Naomi will tell you crazy stories of like spending hours not having time to pee, not having time to drink water because they were in Minneapolis at Pride and they were just, underwear was flying off. And it was the two of them, right? And there's so many people who that is the connection, right? They know these people as being fearless. They know them as being willing to stand up all these points. They saw these words before and they know these are the words of the company. So by giving them that, even when it maybe people would say that, hey, do you really want so much touchy-feely stuff when you're out trying to raise money from investors? When your investors are into the touchy-feely and they were with you for the touchy-feely, then 100% yes. Right? So show the humanity, show the things that make you special. And for some of your investors, you are the thing that make them special, right? You and your people are the reason why they are there. And that can even come to how you're telling them the metric sort of parts of the story, right? We're framing it around what is it that the people are, right? We're framing this story that as different from what you'll see in a few minutes. We're framing this metric story around the people instead of the people story around the metrics. And again, just reinforcing that message. Okay, so this was what we took for the first group of people, was the investors that had been with us for a long time. For our second group of people, because we were not successful at getting a ton of money from those people, right? I think I'm honest with you, I think it was maybe a couple hundred K. It's a hard sell, it's a really hard sell for people to be like, hey, you put in 100K before, and now we're asking you to put in another 100K. It's a really hard sell. So know that, right? Especially in that situation, especially in a down round, it's going to be a hard sell to go back to your original investors, even when they have stuck by you and they want to be with you. Some putting that feeling of they're putting more money in, more money after, right? That are they further investing in something that hasn't returned to them can be a really hard place. So set appropriate expectations there. For us, we went out to say, okay, who else cares about this? And we're like, well, there's groups of people who care a lot about women entrepreneurs. There's groups of people who care a lot about queer entrepreneurs and want to and understand that there's terrible statistics out there, right? It's something like, oh gosh, Fran knows this off the top of her head. I think it's 98% of venture capital goes to straight white men or something like that. It's insanity, right? It's like around those sorts of numbers. If I remember correctly, it's like 5% of venture capital go to women at all, and then queer women is of course a further subset of that. So there are people who care about that problem. So can you have a story for them? And that's what this version of the story was about. So here, what we wanted to do was we wanted to connect with the feelings that they had, right? They know that authenticity is something important. They know that being part of a brand that's accepting the fact that demographics are changing, that understand that size inclusivity is a real issue, understand that just we want more diversity in silhouettes and going away from these binaries of like, this is what women wear and this is what men wear, right? Here now we're being able to present this story in a way that we're showing we are the people for that, right? And you'll notice here, right? Like we are talking, we're trying to give them those little things that will help them come into this, especially when they don't have that much context. So when you talk about underwear, especially women's underwear, Victoria's Secret always comes up. So you can get in front of that, right? Again, something I'll come back to a little later on, but you can anticipate the kinds of questions that people will have, and you can just slip them in so that then that content is be there. And even when they invariably will ask the question anyway, because they weren't listening to you when you were saying it, you can point to and be like, oh yes, on slide 3, we talked about that. Victoria's Secret was the market leader, but now has started to shift. Another thing you'll notice in this version is the imagery. We really went and said, what is a male gaze imagery? And then stepped away from that, right? So some of the images that we chose here for this version of the deck are really around saying a direct repudiation of that, right? Like we didn't want to be feeding into this thing of like, oh yeah, it's all sort of like bosom shots and these kind of sexy things, but we can show that there's other sides of queer and other sides of queer women, right? They don't have to just be sexy all the time. Some things can just be about being comfortable. And again, that's part of reinforcing that message. We knew that we were taking these two values-driven investors, people who cared about the world that they wanted to see. They wanted to invest in the world they wanted to be there, right? So how do we show that we are part of that? With the words we're putting and the words we're saying, but also with the iconography, also with the imagery that we're putting in front of them. here what we're talking about is we're framing the raise, but we're also giving the context around, hey, this is we're not just saying that VC money mostly goes towards men. We're actually showing you how it impacted us in this market. Here's three companies that started at the same time as Tomboy X, so much bigger brands, and what is their kind of unique characteristic? It's that they're male founded, right? I can make that a little bit bigger. I can see that maybe it's a little bit small for some of us. Um, Let me know if that's better. Okay, cool. Right. And this, I think I talked about a little bit a second ago, but we wanted to show that they were part of this community, right? We were obviously, when you invest, it's up to you how much you stay part of that company. You don't always, sometimes investments are more passive, sometimes they are more active, as we talked about last month. And we would love for those of you who haven't seen it to go take a look at that conversation, because I think we really did have a great conversation about active versus passive investment and what kinds of investment to look for at what parts in your journey. But yeah, we wanted to call out for those kinds of investors here, and we were aware. We actually deliberately shopped this in a certain way. One of the biggest investors we got was the wife of the Shopify co-founder, and it was the first investment she's ever made in a equity investment. Right, she's invested in funds before, but never in an equity investment. And part of it, I mean, I don't think we lied at any point, right? But part of it was this kind of messaging, was just helping her feel like, yeah, we are a group of people who care about the same things as you. We're going to be there with you as you're learning about this business, and we're going to be as honest as we can about what's happening in the business. But we're also very clearly saying that, this is a way you can live your values. And she's someone who has invested a bunch of money in nonprofits to help Native women in Canada. They're Canada-based, right? So help Native women in Canada, do all sorts of things to kind of help disadvantaged communities. And we presented this as a way that she could do that in a for-profit way. Um, I'm really, really happy she invested. It was very successful for us. Uh, do I feel like now we haven't really spoken since June, right? And I made this promise that you're joining a syndicate of like-minded investors. Do I feel a little bit uneasy about that? Yes, 100%, right? Like, it sits in the back of my head that I made this personal promise that this is going to be a group that you're going to feel supported by and connected to. What does that mean? It just means I'm going to give her a call, right? So and I'll again seeding this just because I'm going to come back to this later, but be aware of where your own roadblocks are, and as much as possible, try and just cut them down to size, right? Okay, so I made a commitment. So I will manage that commitment, and I will stay true to that commitment. It doesn't have to be this kind of thing that can be like, oh, I cannot make this kind of promise because it means all these different things. Well, what do those things mean? And what will it take for you to fulfill the commitment, the expectation that you're creating? So that was number two, right? So that was when we were like, okay, we got these people who care about values, they care about macro trends, they want to see a different world, and we have a story for them. But so Jess, she was one of our biggest singular investors. But if I remember correctly, even summing at this point, I think we're about two and a half between those two groups of the 5 million that we needed to raise. So we were still out there trying to be like, okay, we got more money we need to raise. So now we made another version of the story. And this was a story that was more focused around the potential of this business, because this business had some crazy statistics. Part of being run by venture capital for 4 years was that there was this relentless focus on profitability, to the extent that if any of you saw Tomboy X, 6, 7 years ago, you would see them everywhere. They were at pride parades. They were all through Seattle. They had this big, loud presence that really disappeared over the last 3 or 4 years. And that was because they had this relentless focus on profitability. Well, what do you do with that? You make a good story. Um, so first part of that story, and this is just to kind of also frame for you how we've shown that same information in a couple of different ways. This is again telling that story of the generational shift I talked about in some of those other versions, but here we're presenting in a much more metric-driven way, right? We're talking about what does LGBT growth look like? What is happening with those types of consumers? Why is that consumer base growing? And what is the net result of that, right? We expect that they're going to be driving this kind of demand. Um, Again, yeah, this is that kind of content about Victoria's Secret, excuse me. Again, reframed in a much more metric-driven way, right? Especially for investors who may may or may not be this may not be a sector that they often invest in, right? For generally, unfortunately, the people you're going to be pitching to are men, and when you're pitching something like women's underwear, they're like, oh, I don't know anything about that market, I'll have to talk to my wife. And you're like, okay. And then invariably their wife is like, oh, I've never heard of Tom X, I only buy these sort of brands. And it's like, okay, well, maybe you're not part of I'll come back to that question. Thank you, Megan. So maybe you're not part of that group, and maybe that group is not right for you. So how do we help them? How do we help them contextualize this in a way that lets them see it as a viable investment? You use the language they're expecting, right? We're talking about cumulative annual growth rate, CAGR, right? Like we're using the language they're expecting in order to be able to tell this story, to get them to see that this is something that is accessible to them. This particularly matters when you're trying to take a story to people who may be investors of a different kind, usually. So growing up in Seattle, having the kind of network that I do, I have a lot of tech bros in my network, right? Or just people associated with tech. There's tech gals too. And they have a different sort of sense of what it means to grow a business and what kind of metrics they look at. And it's very quick for them to be like, oh, I don't do that kind of thing. I don't really understand physical businesses. How can I frame this in a way that feels more accessible to them? Language. And then this is the part I was hinting at a minute ago, right? Highlight those things that make you feel really special, right? It's crazy that Tomboy X has a 2.5% return rate. Like actually crazy, right? So we put that front and center so that someone will ask about that and then we can tell the story. All right, yes, we do all these saves with our customer service team. We make sure that people are happy. We have all these different ways of making sure people are happy. Net result 2.5% compared to an industry average of 30%, right? Again, choosing the product margin to highlight. Sure, some people are going to obviously ask you about gross margin or about contribution margins, but we wanted to choose the margins, choose the numbers that make us look good. And it's, yeah, right? Like you're not being dishonest by highlighting the parts of the story that are make you look good. And I think that it's really easy to get caught up in that notion where there's an expectation from you of saying, yeah, we have to sell these kinds of metrics because people want to understand. Never, there's when someone asks about it, sure, you can help clarify, you can give that depth of understanding. At no point do you need to feel like you're lying, but at no point do you also need to highlight things that don't make you look good. And these metrics all make us look very good, right? And that's the reason why they are the ones on the screen. And then this is also that last one, maybe would feel slightly surprising to you, the 9% versus 20%. What we were highlighting there is that despite not having the kind of brand spend that is typical, despite not going out and spending money on marketing, we're still being able to drive these kinds of numbers. So, which is why maybe that one felt a little bit uh, extraneous from the other ones. Cool. So I think at this point, uh, I would say we were pretty close. Like I think at this point we had gotten to about 4.5 or so, but we were still chasing that last 500K. And so now we started to go out and go and have conversations that you don't, at least I didn't really want so much to have, because there's different kinds of investors, right? There's investors who are excited about the dream. There's executive investors who are excited about you as people. There's investors who are excited about you as an opportunity, or that you have great unit economics and they feel they can help you grow. But then there's also investors who are looking and saying, hey, can I make a good amount of money on this because this company is in trouble, or this company was in trouble and I'm going to be able to capitalize on the fact that it was in trouble. So there's obviously a great story for them too, because this is a company that was worth $40 million a couple of years ago and now is worth 5. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. It had this crippling debt burden that we had to renegotiate, had these really difficult people on the cap table that we had to do a bunch of work to try and get them diluted out to the point that we could actually get them off the board. Of course, they're still on the cap table. But there was all these reasons why the company had fallen so precipitously in value. Now, does that matter? Yes and no, right? Like it matters in that it's part of how you're going to prove that you guys are good operators and you're able to turn this company around and bring it back on track. But it doesn't need to be the focus, right? And that's the same thing I'm kind of been reinforcing as I'm going through this. Tell the story that makes you look good. Right. So here we wanted to get the information to people in a way that we didn't know exactly what kind of box they were looking for, but here we're presenting them a bunch of the things that makes this business outstanding. So here's almost a summary view of what we spelled out in much more detail on some of the other versions, but really just so they're quick bullets, right? First lock sponsor feeds. We have a third of these units. We're in all of the, we're not just a direct to consumer brand, right? We're in Cold, we're in REI, we're in Nordstrom, right? We have all these values that other kinds of underwear brands you may be thinking we are not like that. And we're also trying to reinforce with something like this that we're been around the block. We have 55,000 reviews, right? We're not a business that's just looking for a little money and then going to go out of business, right? Like we have been around, we understand, we had a bad moment, but the fundamentals of this business are really, really strong, and that's what we want you to look at and take away from this page. And then this was an interesting thing, right? Here was like, well, one of the things that's a fundamentally core value of this business is that it has a community, and it has a really committed community. So how do we tell that story to the investors who do not really care about it? Well, we kind of a roundabout way, right? They're so people were so surprised by what the hell is this slide. But what this slide was is the fact that Tomboy actually gets invited to weddings and gets invited to graduations, and that's what some of these invites are. Is the yeah, they get sent to the office because people are like, you changed my life, right? I had never felt like I was seen in a way until I got to wear this underwear, and I was supported in a way that I hadn't been supported before. That's a hard message to tell to people who are like, oh, I want to get the money off this asset, right? I'm really excited about like, hey, this thing is undervalued by 80%. I think you're going to have at least a 10% jump in a year, so I want to just get in there. Well, that kind of mindset won't let them value me the way I want to be valued, right? I want them to realize that Tomboy X is special. And it has these core fundamentals that are really strong, and one of them is this core community. So here's a way that I can just almost surprise them, and that this is a value that maybe wouldn't normally think about as being such a strong value. And then, right, reinforcing the story of where we're going forward, right? So some of the other versions of the deck, we had some things talking about the team transitions and the people who are leaving and the new roles that were coming in. No, here we were like, these are the people that are going to carry you forward. They were all on the call. And these are the people that are going to be able to make this business successful. The key part of this message was showing that we were good operators, that were going to be able to carry the business to a point where it would again start to make money. It would again start to have real enterprise equity. So those are my four versions. If you remember that question I asked at the beginning, right? How do we know it's going to feel special? So here we pulled out four things, right? We said connection. So really the fact that we had a deep connection with some of our user base, some of them being our investors, that was the thing that made us feel special. We made a whole deck around that, and we took that to those people who cared about connections. People who cared about the world, who wanted to invest to see the world that they liked, the people who are willing to put their money behind their words, right? Who wanted to put their money in saying, I want to build this world. We made a version for them and saying, hey, there's a certain world that we are dreaming of too. Connect with us on our values. Connect with us on the fact that there's injustice. And by doing this work with us, you will be able to help be less injustice, right? That was a whole sense of this, of the values that, especially in a company like Tomboy, where we had such strong values, it just made so much sense to say, we can go out and build a story around our values and see who's going to connect with us on that story. Unit economics, as I talked about, right? That there's a whole that taking the strong metrics of your business, especially looking for kind of the bright side of it. And I'll pause for a second to answer Megan's question, though I think she's left us. Oh no, she's no longer on the call. Uh, yeah, so the VC firm that made the investment in 2019 into Tomboy was called the Craftery, and they're a little bit of an unusual firm. Just one second. Mm. In that they claim that they're going to come in and help you with your operations. So I think, Fran and I are now at this point quite close, and we've talked a lot about this. that if she knew what she knew now, she would not have taken the money, but she didn't, right? She was a first-time founder. She was looking to scale her business. They had, I think, just done 1 million units in a year in 2018. So they were just coming off some really big successes, feeling like they were, hoping to kind of get something. And then a big part of it was in 2019 that Craftery they put $10 million into the company, but they also spent $8 million to buy shares from existing shareholders. This is a big factor, right? You've been at that point, I think Fran and Naomi had been running their business for like almost a decade. And sure, you get some like, I don't know, 100K a year, maybe, if that, some years maybe 50K as founders, right? But here's a moment where you can actually see a payout. And so it's easy for us to look and say now and be like, oh yeah, hindsight's so clear. She shouldn't have taken the money. It caused all these problems for the business. But that was also a friend and Naomi bought their house, right? So it's really hard to say that not giving the opportunity to take money off the table is a good idea. Sometimes if you have that opportunity to take some money, to give the opportunity to your early shareholders to sell out and to have some cash, it can really make it easier for later conversations down the road. And just also gives you some more freedom, right? You're not having to make as cash constrained decisions. Anyway, yeah, so I think it's without going too much into the details, because I think I did talk a little bit about it in the recording of last time as well. But basically, I think that they had an idea that they were going to be able to sell the business. That's the only thing I can possibly understand, because in 2021, the Craftery, who had 56% control and was able to make these decisions, they took a $4 million loan that was a variable interest rate that started at about 21% and went up to about 32%. So this loan was absolutely absurd, right? It was killing the business, like completely killing the business. And we kind of went hat in hand earlier this year to the lender, and we were like, listen, the business is going to go bankrupt. We have all this money willing to come in, but the only way that the money will come in is if you renegotiate this loan with us. So that was how we were able to renegotiate the loan that Craftery had signed. But it's really absurd to me that they signed the loan at all. The only reason I can think of that they signed the loan is because they thought it was going to be temporary and they had a buyer in hand, and that fell through. And when that fell through, suddenly they were saddled with this big loan. We're in the middle of the pandemic, all this shit's happening, and they didn't have more capital available to try and refinance it. Yeah, and then the solution was to kind of really focus on profitability, which meant cutting all brand spend and really slowly leading to a debt cycle for the business. So dark moments. But we got there, right? And part of how we got there is by having these different curated versions of our story. So here's some questions. I'll stop talking for a second and let you guys look at them for a minute. And if anyone wants to talk about it with us, with Divya and I, we're happy to kind of talk about it with you. If no one's chimed in a minute or two, Divya and I will talk about it using Joyus, using our company as kind of an example. And I might sit down at this point. Also happy if no one wants to actually unmute and say, you can just put it into the chat. Okay, maybe we should start the then, and we can always, if someone wants to ask some questions, we're also happy to kind of do one-off sort of questions too. It's no big deal, really. So, oh, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, I can go first. Okay, so like if we just think about what's unique about your story right now, if and it's surprising how long it took Karan and I to get to it, but if you just look at the two of us, our profiles are fairly diverse. Like Karan is a trained chef. I have worked on everything from games to products to movies, startups, everything along all of those different axes, and we have a very very general purpose creative experience on both of our ends. And at the same time, we also have worked with individuals, we have worked with companies, we have worked with startups, 0 to 1. Karan has worked a lot in scaled up companies, in corporates, consulting, full time, all of those different things. And what we realized, like just looking at the both of us, that, oh, it is actually quite unique that we have this kind of broad experience across different domains, different sizes of companies, and just figuring out how we can help people. Sorry, I got distracted by your message. Uh, but we just looked at each other and we realized that, like, this is something which is special. If you're coming to a services company, often they would go very depth first, but we have a lot of breadth first expertise, and that's unique, especially if you have actual done experience and you're not just coming in saying, oh yeah, yeah, we know how to think about it, but you've actually done it. That just becomes really unique and special and a part of your story. In, like, it's not easy to make any story feel cohesive. You look at, like, a company like Apple or Nike, and you look at their branding, their story, their marketing, and you think, wow, they have done it so well. The amount of hours they must have spent awake are infinite. Yeah, so like
Yeah.
maybe that's what I would talk
No,
about. Yeah.
no, I think that's a really great kind of starting point. And to kind of just pull out for you guys a little bit of what Divya was just saying, a lot of the feedback you get from everyone when you're starting a business is you should focus, right? Tell everyone, just focus on that one aspect you're really good at and make your story around that, right? Like, oh, maybe you guys are best in class at design, so make your story around that. And in fact, we were guilty of that. Like initially, we only built ourselves as a design studio, and then we're like, oh, how are we differentiated from all the other design studios in the world? Right. And then it was as we started to, right, who cared about us? The people who cared about us were the people who saw us more broadly, the people who understood that we had a breadth of experience and that when they hired us, they weren't just hiring us to do design, or they weren't just hiring us to help them with their product, that we would also help them think about how do you take this product to market, right? And how do we actually make customers want to use it when they actually, once they've installed it? And how do we make them actually come back to it? Right? A lot of designers, they just stop here, right? They stop at what does the actual UX, the visuals of it look like, and are not thinking about how do you create the desire for the person to invest the time to actually use the UX. So we realized that the people who cared about us were those people, right? And the stories that other people were telling about us that were making customers come back to us, that were making new customers come seek us out, were around that. It were the people who were shocked that I had gone to culinary school, right? Or the people that were like, oh my God, they just built a game? Like she's built 7 games? Like what? Like those were the people who were interested. Those are the people who came back to us. And those were I mean, I'm kind of jumping through my questions here, but that was what was motivated them, right? That sense of curiosity. So how was it that we would feed that sense of curiosity in a way that they would come to talk to us? And one of the things we realized was all of the collaterals we put out there didn't really matter as much as having a conversation with them. So everything that we needed to put out needed to drive people to want to talk to us, because at that point was the point that they would get curious, that they would care. So much more so than having this kind of like perfect deck or something, was having a deck that opened up enough places of curiosity, enough questions in their mind, that then they would be like, hey, I want to have a conversation with you guys. And it's super easy because I have an open question that like got started by reading this thing. So I don't even have to think about what I want to talk to you about. I know it from reading your document, right? Like, tell me about this app. Tell me about this project that you worked on. Tell me about why you went to
Yeah.
culinary school. That's not in any of
Yeah.
our decks, but yes.
Another thing that I would say is, and this is on the third question of what has made other people care. If you talk to people, oftentimes you have a story in your mind. But sometimes the customer, the user reflects something back at you that you haven't expected. And the temptation can be to sort of like just ignore that feedback and go on back to your story and just talk about what you think you care about. Like this was maybe like 7, 8 months back, but one of our like clients said that what made me really want to work with you is your people centric approach. And we had never said that. Karan and I both like people. We both love talking to people. We love helping them solve problems. But we just never really thought of it as people centric approach. But the moment she said it, it just made perfect sense that, oh, yeah, that is something that we do. And that is something that we wouldn't have realized by ourselves. But we have to listen to other people who are coming to us and who are connecting, and just keep an eye out for, oh, this is resonating with you. Okay, let me see how that becomes a part of my story.
There's actually an interesting little side story about if I know which client I think I do that. Divya. Speaking of, this was someone who we had pitched like a branding project, and she found that having a conversation with us was so helpful for her being able to think about where to go with her small business. It's kind of a solo kind of sort of business. Um, that we actually ended up doing a consulting arrangement where we talked to her for 3 hours a month. Right. So very different than this branding project, but the value that she was getting from us was in the clarity and thought that she was getting in having these conversations. And so at this point, we were willing to have enough sort of self-doubt, enough willingness to kind of listen to what the market was telling us to say, yeah, maybe we need a longer sales cycle for that branding, right? Maybe we need to spend months with her to get to a point where she's ready to do a branding project. But here's someone willing to pay us for those months, right? So why not, right? And so we were like, sure, we would happily do this kind of consulting arrangement with you. And then maybe there's a branding project at the end of it, or maybe not, right? Um, so kind of a key with that, and this is something that I was thinking about as when we were putting together those four different versions of the story, is how do you know how to adapt it, right? How do you know which parts to keep consistent, and how do you know which parts are should change to the different versions. And one of the things that I think is really helpful there is to think about the different spectrums. Think about the people who feel really different that are in your customer base or in your qualified lead base. To other people who feel incredibly different, right? So in our lives, right, we have people who like the client I just mentioned, who's an artist, right? She's literally an artist, and she like sure she trained some other artists as part of her practice, but she's basically like very much in the creative world, very much like kind of getting grants, just a very different space than right now. Before this call, Divya and I had a call with someone who likely should be a unicorn next year, and they're building a fashion startup in India, right? And so they're totally different ends of the spectrum. And then we've also done some work with some larger businesses where it's like, oh, there's this, they want to roll out a game, or in fact, there was even a financial services client in India that, yeah, wanted to have a game to help people build financial competency. Again, a totally different spectrum. So now we start to get some sense of saying, okay, well, I'm saying out loud it's a different spectrum. Why? Right? What is it that makes them different? And then you start to see, okay, is it the industry, right? So are we saying that for us, the spectrum is the industry? So maybe there's unifying. Oh, it's always clients who are looking to grow their business, not so much clients who are looking to reduce costs. So that's pretty consistent. That's not two ends of the spectrum. But the industries are wildly different, or the company sizes are wildly different. So that gives me two ends of the spectrum. So now I can start to think about how am I adapting the story for my clients that are on both ends of the spectrum. I don't know if maybe you can clarify that a little bit more, Divya. I feel like I went off a little bit.
No, I was just reading Marie's question, but later. No, I would say that it's also interesting to just tease out, even as you are thinking about it, in your head, who are the people who talk to me? And obviously, there are these, like, conventional sort of ends of the spectrum that you might think, okay, small business versus large business, or like, productized versus service side. And it might be that, but it might also be, oh, I like the two kinds of people who come to work with me are one who are completely lost about what to do and they come to me for X. And the other is these are people who have a precise idea of what they need and they just come to me for Y. Um, and I would say that, like, just thinking about those spectrums which are unique to you would be quite useful.
Yeah. Now I also got distracted by these questions. But maybe I'll just come to PJ's first. Cold start is a really big issue. In the tech industry, it's a whole term, right? How do you deal with the cold start issue? It really depends a little bit on your industry, right? It's hard for us to kind of say standing here. I would to give you some thoughts though. I would say that there's always people who are resonating, right? Even before you have a business, when it's just an idea, there's people who resonate with this idea, and then there's people who are like, oh, that the world that the way I see it has no room for that idea. Right. And I think that can start to give you a sense of where is the resonance, right? What is the commonalities between the people that I'm talking to? Is it that they had shared life experiences? Is it that I don't know, they all lived in Tokyo at some point in time, or they all grew up gay, right? Like, is it that they saw oppression very firsthand, and then that let them realize that, oh, there is an opportunity here, which is blind to people who never experience what it's like to kind of be in a minority of some kind? So I would say that kind of PJ. I know it's not the best answer, but I think I would try and say when I'm really new, I would almost start by looking for the commonalities and looking for the people who are resonant, and then start to worry a little further along about how am I adapting it to the to the flavors I need for the different people. Initially, let's find that common base and find the thing that then you can go out and um, use to grow your business.
I
Um,
would also add another thing on the new part. As like blunt as it may sound, you need to just stop being new, which means you need to tell your story multiple times to multiple people. Like if you feel like, oh, I'm really new and I don't know how to find the right investors, make a list of 100 investors. It's okay, right? Like just tell yourself, I have to get through these 100 and have those 100 conversations. You will learn like small things behaviorally by telling your story 20 times, right? And then each next set you can keep improving. And eventually you would be able to say, oh, when we had that conversation with that investor, and then you're no longer new. Like when you're speaking, also, you will feel confident. You will understand what is your story, what makes your story special, where do people connect, right? A lot of this um, I don't like, as somebody who has done the cold start a few times in her life, I would say that like you're never really cold starting. That is part of what Karan's answer is, that there are already people who believe in you. You just don't know how to look for them. So like look for them a little harder and just go out and do it a lot more. If you're new, then like, make use of the fact that you are new. There is not much at stake. Just try it again and try it once more, and then eventually you'll figure out what your story is.
Yeah. People are really willing to help. It's kind of surprising, especially when it's like, oh, I'm new. I've never done this before. Can you please give me a little bit of your time? You would be shocked how many people will give you a 30-minute meeting. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
still saying like people in your network, people who have some sense of you, but leverage that, right?
Yeah. And also like sometimes like let's say we are talking about investor conversations here, but maybe you have customers, maybe you have people who are like, in your industry and they are your peers, or maybe they are counter industry. So like if I'm a designer, maybe a developer is somebody who is in the counter industry to me. Maybe if I'm a visual artist, an audio artist is in a counter industry to me. Chat with them, figure out what are their problems, what are the stories, or what are the parts of your story that resonate with them. Like, for example, what Marie wrote, right? Like, there are architects and material suppliers. There are two parts of your business, and you and your co-founder have background in each side. It would be just like really nice if you just switched up which side you speak to. You would learn so much more. Like if you are the architect, you could go and speak to the construction people and just learn and understand their language. And like your co-founder could do the reverse. Again, I agree that like, not being a serial founder, graduating from famous universities, all of those are advantages. But it's useful to think about advantages as like a cup that you're trying to fill. Some people have a slightly more filled up cup than others. Like if you're a woman, if you're from a poor country, if you're queer, like, all of those things make your cup a little more empty. But at the same time, like, you just need to do other things to fill it up. It's obviously possible. There are a lot of people, as hard as it may seem, there are a lot of people who are doing amazing things, regardless of like, what their university background is. And people don't become serial founders without being a founder once.
I think in what Divya said just now and what she was saying a few minutes ago, you're hearing one of her really special traits, which I've tried to learn a little bit from her. But this notion of like just reminding yourself constantly that it's not one shot, right? Even if it feels like this is the make or break grant or the make or break investor conversation, there's more investor groups. And if you have that mindset, it's easier to say, hey, I want to take this meeting because I want to learn from it. And I'm not even walking in. Sure, it'd be nice to get the money. Sure, it'd be nice if I'm able to form a long-term relationship, but I'm really walking in because I need to learn, right? I had a colleague, oh my God, a decade or so ago, who used to interview every month. And I was like, Eve, are you unhappy in your job? And she's like, no, I do it so I stay sharp, right? And so when I actually have the interview I want, I've already mastered those sorts of skills. So I would say that, right? That I think like, and this is why I actually changed the slide while Divya was talking as well, that I think there are these roadblocks you can anticipate, right? And maybe for you, Marie, that it is this one that I'm sure maybe, right? People have called you on it, right? They're like, oh, why are you guys the right team, right? You haven't started a business before. Do you really even deeply understand finance? Do you understand sales, right? All sorts of shit people throw at you, right? So it's how do you anticipate that, right? That someone's going to make you feel authentic or make you get into a place where you feel like you're lying. What are you going to do? You know, and I think as much as possible for those moments that you know are going to be hard, you can prepare for them. For me, like it's that I know that especially when I get started on slides, when I start doing presentations like this, I find those moments a little bit difficult. So what do? I rehearse it. You know, I just rehearse those first few slides. I know once I get going into it, there's a million stories I'm excited about sharing. But I also know that if I get tripped up at the beginning, it can be really hard for me. Like during one of the first workshops we did for Start Out earlier this year, I like, had a moment where I was like, oh God, I'm like, I don't know what I'm saying. I need a moment. So I asked if you had to like speak for a minute. I turned off my video. I went and got a glass of water. I came back and I turned on my video again, right? Nobody else knew that I had this momentary freak out. But I had, and now right now I have my water with me. I can have all these, I anticipate the fact that I might need a moment. I anticipate that I might need a thing to do there, right? So now I just take a sip of my water and it's fine, right? But I can anticipate because I've seen that this is the part that's hard for me. So I would say that,
I would
right? And I think,
also
go ahead.
I would also like to add one more thing. I think that, like, especially as people who have certain disadvantages, it can feel a little bit like every time somebody asks you questions around that, will you be able to do it? It also reinforces some part of your brain which also is questioning, will I be able to do it? It's really helpful to, like, sort of just like, ask you. Like, ask yourself, ask your friends, people in your industry, who are people who look like me, who feel like me, and have done this before. So, like for example, recently I was asking ChatGPT, who are women designers who have work that, like, is really seminal. And it was really interesting because most of the big artists tend to be men. Most of the big designers tend to be men. They tend to be white men. And GPT helped me find out some brown women who had done interesting design work. Some were Sri Lankan, some were Indian. And like it was great. Now suddenly I had these examples. So I would just, like, this is a orthogonal thing, but I would 100% recommend just looking up those kind of people. Um,
And I think Startup
and
actually is an amazing community for that, right? Like I've done some mentoring to start out. They have a whole mentorship community. Like it's so nice having a low stakes person that you can present things to, you know, like and with someone who somewhat cares about you. Like we're all queer, right? You know, everyone wants to see each other somewhat. They're not actively trying to fuck you over. So go and do a practice presentation to them and be like, hey, what resonated with you? What has stayed with you? And see if it's what you were expecting.
yeah, um, to Amanda's question, I wonder if there is something about your story that is not contextualizing it correctly. So your opening conversation is interesting, but somewhere in the middle they get unconvinced or don't get sufficiently convinced.
Yeah, early is usually a euphemism. So there's something they're looking for, and I would push on that. And is it revenue? I mean, revenue is usually the obvious one. I mean, obviously, I don't know the state of your business. Oftentimes, it's a revenue. It's like reoccurring revenue. Sometimes it can be like, right now there's a company that I'm really hesitant about investing in because the CEO is not paid and they're telling me about how they're running with these great numbers and I'm like, yeah, because you have 100K or more that you're just not paying right now, right? And for how long is that sustainable? So in my mind, I'm like, this is early because they're not fully accounting for all their costs. And I would feel a lot more comfortable investing in a business once they're fully accounting for their costs, and none of them are just goodwill. Because at the end of the day, people need money, and you can't just assume that you're not going to have to people are the founding team is going to survive on fresh air. Like at some point they have to be paid by their business.
Yeah. I would also say that, like, just think about those different axes. Um, I feel like I get left in the dark. Um, yeah, it might be interesting to just like think about the different axes. Is it about revenue? Is it about product thinking? Sometimes it's also about scaling up. So you are making some money right now, but how like the investor makes money when your business scales up? Whatever like rate at which they're expecting it to scale, are you telling that story? Because it might be that basically what they are saying is, okay, I want to see you make more progress before I commit to it, which means that they're trying to see where the graph will grow. Maybe it is about, like, you have three people working in your team right now, and they think that this team is going to need 50 people. Would you be able to hire? Would you be able to build that kind of team? Um, but yeah, I would say that. you can actually just ask them, it's like, oh, what were you looking for?
And maybe to add just a slight thing with that, I mean, sometimes people don't want to get into justifying, right? Like sometimes, like I'm
Yeah.
actually going to have a call with the gentleman on Friday, so we'll see what kind of feedback I give them. But like, if I get the feeling that I'm going to have to deal with them explaining to me why my feeling is wrong, right? That they're going to justify every point that I make, it's like, please, I don't have the energy. Like I walked away with this feeling, right? And I'm willing to share with you the feeling that I walked away with. I don't want to hear your explanation of why I shouldn't have had that feeling. Like that is exhausting for me as an investor or a prospective investor. So I would just say, as much as possible, keep that in the back of your mind, make them want to help you and not feel like they're going to have to argue with you. I
Yeah.
think we're
Yeah.
almost out of time, but
Yes, I think so. But I think there are no more questions.
yeah, I think so. I mean, and honestly, you guys like happy to if someone wants to reach out, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can
Maybe
find
you can
Joyous.
share our
Oh,
next.
yeah. Do you know, Josh, when our next session is? I can try and pull it up. If not, sometime in September, it should be next month.
Yeah, I think it's 20th or something like that. We are doing
It's
another.
September 18th. I
Okay.
just found it. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, this will be an interesting one. This is psychological challenges and how to brace for them. So there's a little bit what we were talking about at the end here, right? Which is just anticipating those roadblocks and anticipating that's going to be painful, really painful sometimes. So that will be on September 18th at the same time.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Does anybody have any questions or even just want to share some thoughts about what you all took away? It's all really, really great content. I'll have to go and sit in on these calls more often. So thank you both hosts.
Yeah.
Of
And a good
course, our
attendance
pleasure.
today too. I loved what you were talking um, about how it's a red flag when the CEO is not being paid, or even when they're not being paid a full wage, right? I mean, it's called normalizing expenses. And so it's simple things like that that can sort of distort the P&L sheet and about what your expenses really are when it can make your revenues or your profits a little bit more inflated when you don't have those things. And so simple things like that are really important um, to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions, any final thoughts? Thank you both. This was really great. And I love the next topic as well, like the psychological challenges and how to brace for them. That's so, so crucial. Um, so I love all of these.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We hope you can join us for the next one. Don't just make them all be Danny.
Yes, I will. I love that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
well,
Thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah. Thank you.
yes.
This is really lovely.
Thank you all. And I dropped in the chat to the feedback, which I'll go put it again just so it's at the bottom. But please just take a few moments and add your feedback. It's is always very helpful for all of us as we move forward with these kind of virtual events. And with that, have a great rest of your week.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.